Hello, I'm Jim Richards, and I started Impact International School of Ministry in 1982 for a very specific purpose. When I got saved, I really didn't want to preach in churches. I really didn't care about what was going on in churches because churches were not reaching my generation. I wasn't mad at them, didn't have a bad attitude. But I'd already gone from door to door to churches telling these pastors that I had a drug problem, that I was a criminal, that I sold drugs, all this kind of stuff, and that I needed to find God. And nobody led me to Jesus. And many of you have heard my story about how I got saved. And if you didn't, you can check it out on my life story. But the important thing is this. I gave my life to Jesus while riding in a car with another drug dealer, musician friend of mine. And I get born again on my own, read the Bible, go to church, love God, and start winning people to Jesus. I'm telling you, immediately, I was reaching my generation. I was reaching the people, my age and with my background. These people started coming into church, and it wasn't long until churches started contacting me, wanting me to come into their churches. Now, here's the reason they wanted me to come, is because hundreds of people in Huntsville, back in those days, ended up in churches because I won them to Jesus on the streets as I was out witnessing one-on-one. And back in those days, hippies, were out prowling the streets, and we actually had street meetings that became so large that the police came because they thought it was a riot that was breaking out in the city. Well, pastors would have someone come to their church and they would say, well, how did you get saved? And they said, well, there's just some guy downtown that's telling people about Jesus. And then somebody else would show up in his church. How'd you get saved? Well, there's just some guy that roams around downtown telling people about Jesus. And so these pastors would track me down and they would say, listen, come to our church and tell us how to reach our community, how to reach this generation. And even though I wasn't really interested in preaching in churches, I was interested in helping churches to reach my generation. So I'd go into these churches. I would meet with their leadership sometime. I would tell them what I was doing. I'd offer to take them out on the streets with me. I'd offer to help them set up coffee houses, which back in those days was a very powerful ministry. And here's the interesting things. For about 3 years, all the churches that I went to that wanted to know how to do what I was doing, not one of them actually put one thing into practice. Well, along about that time, I started doing independent seminars, and I decided that I would have week-long meetings that I called impact seminars in churches, because I thought, you just can't go in over a weekend and teach people how to do this. You can't just take them out and teach them how to witness. They need a little more input. So I'd go in and I would spend a week with churches and with pastors, and a few of them would actually implement it, and a few of them would actually start reaching their community. But I saw that the mindset of the average pastor was such that really they had to have more than what I could give them in a week. So I went to Bible college. I did my bachelor's degree, started working on my graduate degrees, and continued in ministry. And I realized that the only way that we were going to be effective at reaching the world would be if we had people who were trained, not just trained in your traditional approaches to ministry, but people that were trained in the message of grace, the gospel of peace, faith, righteousness, and unconditional love. And I realized that apart from these 4 basic cornerstones being the foundation of all of the doctrine that was taught, I realized that we can't reach our generation. We can't reach our world. In fact, the Bible says that the reason the world hates God and blasphemes God continually is because leaders make people to howl and to mourn by oppressing them and by not giving them hope and by not showing them who God really is. But Isaiah the prophet says, but a day will come when people will see me as I am, and that day they will turn to me, and then they will say, how lovely on the mountains are the feet of them who proclaim the gospel of peace. So in 1982, we started Impact International School of Ministry, and it really was not a Bible college for the graduate from high school. This really wasn't designed for the person that was just wet behind the ears, so to speak. Not that we would have turned those people away. But most of our students for the first 10 years that we had a school were people who had already pastored churches. They were people who were already ordained into the ministry, and many of them already had degrees in from theological seminaries, but they realized that they had learned things that did not make them effective at reaching this generation and did not make them effective at building healthy churches. So in 1982 we started, and we ultimately developed a complete degreed program. We became accredited, and now our entire program is online. And a new generation of people is coming along that's saying what we have tried up until now has not worked. And I realize this is the message. I realize grace and peace and faith righteousness is the message that people need to hear. So thank God that there's pastors all over the world that are being trained through our School of Ministry. But I want to say something very important and very special to you. You see, I believe that the time is short. I don't really believe we have a whole lot of time to be effective at reaching the world with this message of God's unconditional love. And we've got to use our time wisely. And we have got to put forth a consistent, congruent effort to touch the world in a way that we have never, ever, ever done before, and with a message that the world has never, ever heard before. I work with people across the country and around the world who really are geniuses at figuring out how to reach communities. And in a conversation with one of these men the other day, they said, Jim, we don't understand. We have proven these tools. We've proven that we can reach people in a phenomenal way, and we just can't get pastors to work the plan. Imagine that. Somebody offering you a way to reach your community, offering you a way to be a great influence and to grow your church and to grow your ministry, and telling you the steps to take and not doing it. Well, you know something? That's the condition of the American church. And really, it's the condition of just the average human being. You know, only 5% of the population creates all of the money in the world. In other words, everybody in the world that has a job owes it to 5% of the population that actually creates the money. So many people who have a vision and a passion, they're making it harder to fulfill their vision. They're making it harder to fulfill their destiny than it has to be. I want to give you one of the ultimate secrets in fulfilling your dream and reaching your goals, and it's congruence. In other words, congruence is what happens when you determine where you want to go, and every decision that you make along the way, you know how that decision is going to get you toward that goal. Now, this is really, really important. Because you see, I talk to pastors every day that think that because they've read my book, The Gospel of Peace, or because they've read a couple of books on grace, they think they've got this figured out. But you see, this is different from any message that's ever come to the world, because this is not a message that you can preach one way and live another way. You can't preach love and grace and faith righteousness from the pulpit and then counsel, control, and legalism. There's got to be a consistency between what you preach, how you live, how you treat people, how your children's ministry runs, how every part of your church functions. Impact International School of Ministry will give you the tools that you need to build a church that has a consistent message in the love of God that will make it possible for you to reach your generation, to establish your own heart and your own life in grace, peace, and faith righteousness. And it won't be a message, it'll be a lifestyle. And when it's a lifestyle, you can multiply it throughout your congregation and throughout your community. Go to Impact International School of Ministry. Go to impactministries.com and just click on the tab. We will let you take one course free of charge just to show you what can happen in your life and what can happen in your ministry when you begin to build everything you do on this message.